Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Why Strategy is Better with Data. My name is Jody Shaw and I will be your moderator for today's session. Today's session is sponsored by Spark 2020. Today's presentation will last approximately 60 minutes. During today's live session, you'll be able to go ahead and ask your questions via the chat box at the bottom of your screen for those of you that are joining our live session. To earn education credits for today's session, please make sure that you go back to your session launch page to complete the online education survey for credit. Once you finish that survey, it'll apply the credit to your transcript. For those that are attending our live session, the survey will be attached to the last slide at the end of today's session. Please note, our handouts are available in the Resources tab on the session launch page. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. David Vequist is a speaker and author and has more than 20 years of consulting, industry research experience, and he is also the director of 2 research institutes that are focused on patent consumerism and predictive analysis. We are really lucky to be able to have Dr. Vequist with us today, and we really hope that you are going to be able to ask some questions at the end because we'll have a good 20 minutes to be able to answer all of your questions. Today's session, all the photos and information are authorized so that David Vequist could use them throughout his presentation. In addition, today's presentation is copyrighted. All rights are reserved by Promotional Products Association International. And now we are going to hop into our agenda. Without further delay, I give you David.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining me today under the interesting circumstances that we've seen for the last few months now around the shelter, the recession, the virus, all these interesting things that are going on. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking today is going to be about helping your business to become more resilient and also to help improve your strategic planning, particularly by using data and information that is typically available to you. So just in general, this is the agenda of what we're going to be covering. A little bit about myself, as Jody had pointed out, I've been an executive for a billion-dollar company, also been a consultant with Ernst & Young before I dropped out and joined academia. I'm very in touch with businesses and do a lot of work with small and medium-sized businesses as well through my job at the university I'm at. It's called the University Incarnate Word. We used to like to call ourselves a small university, but it's about 15,000 students now. And we're the 3rd largest private university in the state of Texas. So we're not so small anymore. I'm with the HEB School of Business Administration. Anybody from Texas, you're probably familiar with HEB, which is one of the largest privately held businesses in the United States, large grocery store chain that's primarily here in Texas and northern Mexico. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how strategy is changing, some ways in which to understand how to develop strategies that are smarter and based on data and information. That's through environmental scanning. Then we're going to talk about an interesting concept, which as you'll see, I'm going to call small data, which is collecting both external data and internal data from a variety of different sources. We're going to talk about that, and then how to pull that all together in order to make better decisions using that data. This is very similar to how large organizations use quants and what they typically call big data in order to respond better to ongoing situations and also try to predict the future to make their businesses more profitable and more efficient. Last slide, something that we added to this session because we felt it was important to help you, is how to recover out of this, the COVID-19, the shelter in place, the pandemic, how to come out of that stronger, better, and faster using some of the things that we talked about. All right, so first, Jody's going to pull up a poll question. We're asking you, how many hours a week, approximately, do you find yourself reading about business? Now, this is not something asking about reading in general, for example, reading for pleasure, although sometimes, in the case of a business professor, reading is for pleasure, even if it's about business. But I'm going to be asking you to take this poll, and I'll give you a sense of how that benchmarks against what is suggested great leaders do. Just a few more minutes. Let's try to get some more people in here. How many hours are you reading? First answer is almost no time. Second one is 1 to 4 hours a week. Third is 5 to 10. And the last answer is 11 to 40. What do you think? So the typical answer I see out there is 1 to 4 hours a week. Anybody know what the recommended suggested number of hours is for business leaders? The answer, according to Bill Gates and many other people, is 5 hours a week. The recommended is about an hour a day during the business week. So again, approximately 5 hours. This is something that we find in a lot of what you may consider very famous business leaders that have been very successful. People like Mark Cuban, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and others have typically said that they spend at least an hour a day on business related reading. So one of those things I might want to encourage you to consider, because what you're going to find is that the environment is changing faster than ever before, and it's necessary in order to stay up to date and potentially exceed your competition to be reading perhaps around 5 to 10 hours a week. I don't expect you guys to be getting into the 11 to 40 hour range unless you're so blessed to be in that position to do that. I'm a business professor. I have a little bit more time to do reading. That's actually my job. That's the whole job description. But 5 to 10 hours a week is a reasonable amount, even for a small business owner. All right, so let's go ahead and head on to the next slide. Oops. Sorry, Jody, you might have to put control back over to me, I think. There we go. So let's talk a little bit about how strategy is changing. This is from an interesting article from Harvard Business Review from just a few years back, which was talking about a competitive advantage. The competitive advantage when it comes to business professors and how we talk about competitive advantage has been changing over the years. It used to be thought of as a real tangible thing that you could understand, control, and really have a grasp of. There has been some talk over the last, particularly less than a decade, that perhaps competitive advantage is not as sustainable as we used to think. In other words, it's not something that you can have and hold for a long time. And we've seen the failures of large multi-billion-dollar companies almost on a annual, if definitely on a multi-annual basis. And what we're understanding about sustainable competitive advantage is that it's a temporary thing, and it's something that you gain through work. You can't just have it through your brand, and then it's a legacy gift that you get to keep forever. So as you see, what's happening is most of these things are moving to downstream. And you can see on the graphic that around shaping consumer perceptions, around how you help to shape the market for consumers, not just have it shaped by consumers, but shape it for consumers. The example is obviously Steve Jobs and Apple, who talked about the fact that he builds things that people don't even know that they need. The idea of trying to be more innovative and trying to predict ahead of time what those innovations are that people need, or what the innovations are that the industry hasn't focused on as much, or innovations that your competitors aren't thinking about. And so that's, as you see that first bullet, tailoring offerings to what you know are going to be the environmental or business trends, business market trends of the future. So what's going to happen in the next 6 months, 12 months, based on COVID, based on sheltering in place, based on people using streaming media and using delivery services more than ever? How's that going to affect your business in the future? Getting to that point before your competitors would potentially give you an advantage. And then finally, accumulating all these advantages. And that means establishing your relationships and establishing a network. So being able to get to a point where you are starting to bank some of these ideas, some of these innovations, some of these intellectual property that you have within your business, and trying to figure out how to use those more effectively, again, to grow your business when other people are struggling. So now we're going to go on and talk a little bit about, just briefly, the business model canvas, which you might have seen before. You can go out, look it up on the internet. You're going to find thousands, hundreds of thousands of articles that talk about this. There's some products out there that allow you to put data and information into a spreadsheet or into a PDF file or other things, into software, and try to use that to help understand what your business model is and how that relates to your strategy. What I want to focus on is right there in the middle, you'll notice something called the value proposition. The idea is that once you start to categorize who you know, what relationships you have, what types of customers that you've dealt with in the past, the certain types of distribution channels that you've used for your business, where you tend to get some of your revenue or your sales from, as well as things that tend to cost you money and things that you can't do without in terms of a business. We have an understanding of that. You could start to model what it is that your business really does. And then what you can do is you can start to understand what your strengths are. You can determine based on that where we should go in the future with the business, knowing this is what you can do. I just saw an interesting statement the other day. My gosh, I'm trying to remember who said it, but it was a statement by a leader that said, "Don't tell me what people can't do. Tell me what people can do." And so that's essentially what your value proposition is. I noticed a couple of blinking things. Jody, did we have any questions at this point?
Yep, we just got a request to just pull your microphone up so we get a more consistent audio feed.
You got it. I'll try to put it right to the mouth, and just let me know. Give me feedback, guys, if you need me to say anything more specifically. Repeat it.
Just started, I think, because you're moving around a little bit, so I think it'll help.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
Well, I'll lean in a little bit too. That'll help me to keep the microphone right here at my face. All right, so we've talked about developing a value proposition based on what you can do. We've talked about how strategy is changing to more of a downstream model where you're trying to shape the future, trying to have a little bit better understanding about the future so that you can do the things that you should be doing that will ultimately help grow your business. So as we're talking about that, it behooves me to mention to you that the father of business management, the modern business management, Peter Drucker, said a very profound statement many years ago, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. So as much as we're trying to develop these strategies based on data, based on information, based on what our strengths are, trying to have a good understanding of that, we have to understand that ultimately the culture of our organization could potentially hurt or help us. It can hurt us if what we're doing is making personality-based decisions. In other words, we have these plans, we know what our strengths are, we're looking at data and information, we're trying to predict the future, and we say, oh, this is what we should do, but yet we still allow somebody within our business, perhaps ourselves, to make a shoot from the hip decision that is counter to what the data and information is telling us. Interestingly, the research on this is quite sound over the years, which shows that, for example, checklists that shows that decisions based on algorithms, decisions based on a decision tool typically are more effective than decisions made by individuals, no matter how good those individuals think they may be. And interestingly, if you're successful, that tends to blind you. It tends to create a bias where you think that you're going to be successful, even if you're going against the data and information that would tell you otherwise, and that tends to self-perpetuate itself. In other words, you think you're more successful even though you weren't. So remember that we're trying to get to process-based decisions as much as possible. I'm not saying that there's going to be good people and good people's intuitions aren't going to be helpful. Just saying that typically data and information is a better model for decision-making than is a personality. So we want you to be you, but also we want you to do what's good for your business. So don't let yourself become a barrier to the growth potential for your business. All right, so one of the first things that I teach most of my students in both the BBA and MBA program, and that business people probably have a good sense of already, even if they don't have formal training, is that they need to be scanning the environment. And so this has been around for many years. You'll hear it called by a variety of different things. Typically, it's called macro environmental scanning, and many textbooks. And that's the idea of looking at what's going on in economics, culture, society, mores, things of that nature, things that are going on in movies and TV and the newspapers and series that are on Netflix. Also looking at the technology changes and the impact that they're having on society and culture. And then political, legal, regulatory factors, things that are going on both at international, federal, and local level. That could also include potentially things that are going on from NGOs, unions, other types of organizations. Having a good sense of where all those things are, where they're going, and therefore be able to categorize them into potentially opportunities or threats. As you see, we're getting to a SWOT analysis. Again, strengths and weaknesses typically come from the internal. That was the business model canvas or the business canvas, understanding things that you do, things that you're really good at. And then now we have the sense of what things are changing, again, domestically, internationally, locally, with certain types of products and services, based on certain economic trends, based on cultural trends. Once we start pulling those things together, we can really make much better decisions. So any questions at this point in terms of macro environmental scanning?
None yet.
Okay, so the best way to do a macro environmental scan, most of you probably already figured out from the poll, right? Reading, that's correct. So it's going to be reading, not only reading books, but reading newspapers, making sure that you are keeping up to date on various lists or summaries of topic areas on the internet, and having those delivered typically to your email. That's a suggestion I would recommend. So there's a variety of industry associations, PPAI does this, where they'll send you data and information updates about what's going on in your business or industry. All right, so another thing that I'd like to point out when it comes to the external environment, some of the things that you want to be keeping up with, you also want to remember that your relationships and the development of those relationships are very important. You'll see that come up a couple times in this presentation. So understanding not only who your customers are, what they want, but other types of businesses or business entities that may potentially complement your products and services with your customers. So think of value, and the value you deliver is not just something you do yourself, but something you do in combination with potential suppliers, potential complementers, and also the perceptions that are shaped by substitute products or competitors. So all those things go into an interesting web or net, if you will, of value that your consumers perceive that they're getting from you. So one of the ways to make sure that you are in touch with this is not only to read about what's going on with your competitors, what's going on with your suppliers, what's going on with customers, but also to keep relationships open with all of these. In other words, you probably should be communicating openly, not only with customers, the old traditional methods. You may be familiar with what's called voice of the customer, which means that you're constantly getting feedback or updates from your customers about how happy they are, but also talking with your suppliers, going to groups, conferences, organizations, attending webinars where your suppliers are there, where your potential competitors are there, and also complementary organizations. In other words, organizations that somehow through their offerings, through their services, are somehow helping to grow your products and services that you're offering. So getting back to the Harvard Business Review article, again, what we're seeing is downstream more of a future forward look at strategy. You're seeing competitive advantage typically residing in things that are outside the company. In other words, you're good. What you do is perhaps better than what other people do, but by itself, it's not sufficient in order to develop a competitive advantage. What you're going to have to do is look to relationships with the customers, as I mentioned there, channel partners, distribution channels, suppliers, other people. You're going to have to figure out how to work together with them to collect data, information, to establish processes that will ultimately deliver more value to the customers than what your competitors are doing. You're going to have to work harder, and that means, again, reaching out to people, developing relationships, as well as being well-read. Because if you're not well-read, those relationships are going to be harder to develop, and you're going to have a harder time kind of formulating an idea or a thought that helps all involved, not just yourself. All right, so let's get to the more pragmatic aspects. In other words, how can I help you right now to develop your business and to grow your business in a smart and data-informed way? One way is to start collecting internal data, internal and external. Sorry, we're going to talk about internal data here in a second. This external data. So there's a lot of external data out there that you could collect that will relate to things that you potentially have internally. So in other words, do you have a list of potential relationships on a Facebook site that you're running? Or do you have an email contact list where people are contacting your website and you have a variety of emails or other types of contact information about people that are looking for certain types of products? Your industry associations such as PPAI have data and information that they collect and analyze and produce white papers about. Can you get access to that? Can you collect governmental information? For example, I'm going to show you some source that shows how there's a correlation between weather data and retail sales. Is there articles or analysis that's done by the Wall Street Journal or some other business publication that you go, oh, that's interesting. That's changing in the future. I wonder how that could affect my business. When you combine that with some of the internal data that you have, for example, some of the internal sales data, not necessarily just industry sales data, but your specific products or services data, and complementary organizations, you're going to have this really great spreadsheet that you can then use to predict what might happen better than just by guessing. And that's where you get to your advantage, is you're using data and information to predict something and be able to grow sales at a greater accuracy than if you just guessed yourself. Here's some examples. So I'm having my students, my undergraduate capstone students are currently working on an analysis of Boeing. And they're doing half of that on their own because of the shelter in place. And so I've been exposing them to a variety of different sources of data and information. And recently, I do some work with Bloomberg Business Week, had written up a white paper. And this is some of the data that I just used within the last 2 weeks. I got about COVID-19 and its impact on the aviation industry. There's some analysts out there that are suggesting, interestingly, that the virus is going to have an impact on aviation consumer behavior in the future. In other words, people will probably not jump back into the way things were prior to the pandemic and utilize tourism, transportation, particularly aviation, the way they used it in the past. If I knew that and I had specific data sets, as you see down here, that predict future behavior, what could I do with that? If I knew that people had already put some intellectual thought and had analyzed data and done that, could I take some of this data and say, well, this appears to be going up at 10 to 15% on a yearly basis for the next 3 years? Could I then factor that into a decision that I was going to make about an investment in my business? So let's get to some of the resources that you have available to you right now and that you're probably not utilizing as much as you probably should, which is, for example, PPAI products. I pulled up 3 different examples. There's many more if you go out to their website, particularly if you go out to the research part of their website. There's a strategic foresight playbook that's available that just came out, as I recall. Jody can give you the details on it, about two years ago, year and a half, 2 years ago, that helps you to look at your business and to try and determine how you can improve upon the business practices and specifically meet the value needs of your customers. So this type of research is coming out of industry groups all the time. And unfortunately, what we find with those a lot of small, medium-sized businesses is that they see those things, but they don't think they're applicable, or they don't incorporate them into their business planning. I would highly encourage you to do that. Another great example, and this was just a fantastic one that I just absolutely loved, was PPAI has done a great job of creating an example campaign and to show the business case for promotional products. And they have it out on a website called Get in Touch, showing how organizations around the world can utilize promotional products to help grow their business, sell their business, establish brand awareness, things of that nature. And it has quantitative data analysis about the return on investment of certain types of promotional products. And by the way, these types of analysis are out there all over the place. Most of them free on the internet around, for example, the return on investment of email campaigns, the return on investment of billboard campaigns, promotional products, radio, streaming media, advertising, all those things. Typically the industries are very interested in showing what the return on investment is so that they can get their customers to buy more media space. Promotional products is no different. And so this website has done a great job of this. I encourage you to use all the materials out there. Wonderful materials, including video, pictorial content, as well as PDF documents that you could potentially send directly to your customers. Another source that you'll see that PPAI has been doing over several years is looking at consumers themselves by understanding the downstream consumers and how their needs are changing, what they're interested in. The promotional product industry can then go to their customers and help them by guiding them, being a consult to them, bringing more value to them by showing them this is what your consumers are wanting or needing. If people were drinking more tea and less coffee, then you'd be able to show why certain types of cups, why certain types of containers are more interesting to consumers, and therefore a promotional product of this nature might make more sense. So again, these quick resources where somebody else has done the heavy lifting, the hard work, and done the analysis for you and produced it for you and given you a thought about what's happening now and in the future. Please use that and please incorporate that into what we're going to call small data. All right, so let's get into what small data. Again, if you've been reading business literature, you're probably familiar with what the large businesses are calling big data. So some of you have also either read the book or watched the movie, which, as I recall, interesting. Jody and I were just having a conversation about this. I think this movie had Brad Pitt in this as well. Help me out if anybody remembers. Moneyball. Moneyball is an idea that the baseball organizations, now it's being used by both football and basketball. There was actually some discussion about how big data was incorporated in the last NFL draft that just happened. To be able to figure out how to get the right person, you're going to spend millions of dollars on one of these potential athletes. You want to make sure you get that decision right, particularly during the draft when you're bringing people into your team. The quants in large companies now do this with an amazing amount of precision. What they do is they collect massive amounts of data about consumers, about their sales, about forecasted trends, and they bring that all together, and then they help bring knowledge or potential decisions to executives, and those executives then incorporate that into their decision-making process. Small, medium-sized businesses can do this as well, and that term, as I've clarified, is called small data. And that's, again, as we talked about, what you're doing in your business, your normal business operations is creating data. Sometimes you don't realize it, but it's creating data all the time. Again, the emails you send out, the sales that you generate, that's all creating data, which could then be incorporated into a spreadsheet. Plus, the double bonus is when you have that internal data plus the external data that you're going to collect from the sources such as PPAI or economic sources or weather data sources or wherever you get that, and you incorporate these future suggestions about where consumer behavior is going to change, you now have this magical mix. So again, they give you some examples, talk about the internal data, the external data, such as your sales from this last year, emails from potential competitors, potential customers asking about things that they want. So what if you took that email from, let's say, 100 different customers, and you were able to break those down into, say, 3 different customer types or 5 different industry group types. And so you had approximately 20 emails from 5 different types of industries or potential types of customers. And then you were able to look at, for those 20 emails from those 5 different people in different industries, are there differences? Do certain industries want certain types of promotional products more, or at least for inquiring about those? And then you could incorporate that and compare it to your sales of last year and find out, wow, am I on my website, in my communication to my customers, am I missing the boat? Is there a certain industry or customer group that is wanting something that I'm not delivering yet? Am I missing out on providing some type of value that they're looking for? When you get really super sophisticated, then you're incorporating, as I mentioned a couple of times now, weather pattern, economic forecast, and other examples of consumer behavior. Let me show you a fantastic example. So this is from a website that I look at occasionally because they do some great analysis. This is from a few years back where they did an analysis of weather patterns and retail in a couple of different categories. And what they found was that weather patterns, knowing whether or not it was going to be clear or cloudy, meaning raining or not, or sunny, actually had an impact on your sales. If you knew that, if you knew that there was a 10 to 15% impact, what would you do? I'm sorry, Jody, go ahead.
If you can just move your mic up just a little bit more, I think
I'm sorry.
Lose you on that one. You're back.
All right. So again, if you were to know the difference in the weather and the impact that the weather was going to have on your sales, what would you do differently? How would you change your website? How would you change your promotions? How would you change out your emails? How would you, if you knew that certain types of weather patterns in your region happen during certain times of the year, what would you do differently? These things are fairly easy to predict, and yet you'd be surprised at how many small and medium-sized businesses are not taking these common, almost cyclical occurrences and working them into their promotions, their marketing. So one thing that I hear from a lot of people is that I'd like to do this, but it costs a lot of money to get expensive, sophisticated software packages to be able to do some of this work, or I have to pay a monthly fee to access things. You can do some of this stuff in a guerrilla fashion, as I would call it. For example, if you're going to take emails, you could take emails that you have been exchanging with potential customers, and you could look at them in categories or groupings. For example, how many people are just asking about information around certain types of products? How many people are asking for help in selecting a product or using a product or displaying a product? How many people are contacting you about intent to buy? When they express an intent, are they expressing an intent about buying something today, next week, a month from now? You could start to just simply categorize internal and some external data in terms of groups, and that is going to give you a better it's going to give you a better foundation to go forward making foundations than using nothing. So don't think that I have to go big or do nothing. You can actually start by building your capability or maturity. It's called a maturity model. We'll talk about that. By just getting into your data and starting to categorize it. Typically in an Excel spreadsheet, that means you take things that have similarities, and then you add an extra column, and you call that first column 1. These things have this similarity. And then you have another type of similarity so the first one would be, these are things that happen in the fall versus the summer. Fall is 1, summer is 2, or whatever the category is. And you could say, okay, let's look at the emails by industry, and say you have another column, and you say, here's 5 different industries. So these industries fit into 1, these fit into 2, etc. So ultimately, again, analytics, automating what you're doing is going to give you better decisions. You can see this is another article from Harvard Business Review by one of the people that's considered a father of modern analytics, which is using data and information to help make your decisions going to lead to more correct decisions, and you're going to take the personality out of it. So therefore, you're not going to be a barrier to your business's growth. Okay, last couple things we're going to be talking about. So when you're trying to plan ahead, you need to be looking at, again, as we described as this network or net, or this web of different relationships you have. So you're going to be also looking at the data and developing relationships, and then use those relationships, lean on those relationships to bounce the factors and ideas off of. So you can say, my customers, my downstream customers are wanting these types of promotional products. How does that link together with regulatory environments? How does that link together with what my competitors are saying in a local newspaper article that they're doing? How's that link with what my suppliers are saying that they're getting more demand for these types of products? If you start pulling all those things together, asking questions, then you're going to come up with the right direction that you should be heading into based on the data that you've collected. All right, so last couple things we're talking about is maturity models, mentioned that. But again, don't think that you're going to dive into this and be super successful and super sophisticated about it right away. Analytics, like everything else, means that you're going to develop maturity over time. So it starts with very simply collecting data and information. Some of that could be in paper format or whatever, but eventually you're going to want to digitize it and put it into some manner of spreadsheet. And then from there, potentially, as your business grows and you become more successful, then you can start to invest in a person that does this analytics for you, a quant. They're fairly expensive. Then you could develop a budget for a software package where this is being automated, where you're analyzing it just in time and it's spitting out results to you and helping you as you grow and develop. But you have to start somewhere and start small and then build and go from there. All right, last slide. I wanted to spend just a few minutes on this. By the way, Jody, any questions at this point?
None so far, but for anybody that's on our live session, go ahead and type it into the chat box so that we'll have it in a couple of minutes when we get back to the Q&A.
All right, so the last slide that I really wanted to speak to and spend a little bit of time on is how does this relate to the situation that you're in now? So again, we are sheltering in place. We've had a pandemic. It's a global pandemic. We've had people that are engaging in consumer behaviors that perhaps they did a little bit before, but now they're really doing it. So for example, direct to home, direct to consumer products, which were already gaining some steam prior to this, but now, can we be honest, people have gotten used to doing this. Is the chances pretty high that people are going to have more food deliveries to the house? The answer is probably yes, particularly with the media and the government talking about the chance that COVID-19 will potentially rebound, that there could potentially be a second wave, that there could potentially be a new strain that would develop that would mutate from the virus. So is consumer behavior going to go back to where it was prior to this? The chances that some aspects of that are going to improve, particularly over time, but has some consumer behavior changed? And the answer is yes. Well, how do we determine what that is? Well, the best thing is to start reading. Again, I just sent an email to my president of my university talking about how universities have recovered in the past based on various recessions. And what we expect to happen is that more employers will want to hire college-educated employees in the future after the end of the recession, after people start going back to work, after jobs start to open up again. And so we're expecting actually a rebound based on data and information available from past recessions and past issues that will help higher education institutions. So one thing that we know, actually Jody and I were talking about this from risk management, is that there are things that are known unknowns, things that we have a sense that these things are going to happen at some point in time. Interestingly, Jody and I were talking about pandemics have historically throughout the history of the world, since recorded history, happen every couple of decades. So we knew that a pandemic was going to happen at some point. We just didn't know when they were going to happen. But a pandemic is a known unknown. We don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but we know to expect it. There are things that are unknown unknown. Those are the things that very few people would have ever conceived of or predicted. Those things are a little bit more difficult to get a handle on, but there's still ways to build contingencies in so that you can prepare for those. So my suggestion is, we know certain things are going to happen. You need to read and figure out what those things are, and then figure out how to go forward. Another aspect, relationships still matter, as we talked about several times. You would think, and when I'm talking about strategy and data, I'm just going to say data, 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 but I'm telling you the data without context may not provide the exact end that you're wanting. The other thing is some of your contacts, for example, suppliers. Suppliers are promotional products. The manufacturers that produce certain products can be rich sources of data. The industry that you are involved in can provide rich sources of data. You need to be connected to them, talking to them, and developing relationships so you can get access to the data and so you have context to that data. Another thing that's coming up quite frequently, as you're seeing, is webinars, video conferences, telephone tag. Staying in touch is a skill, and you're still going to need to exercise your muscles in that skill. It's even more important with virtual teams. You can't just have virtual teams and just expect that these webinars, that your telephone messages, that your emails are all you need to do. You need to do more. You need to develop a go-to-market strategy around communication. You need to think about, even if you don't have a budget for a Salesforce CRM type of tool, you can do that in a very quick and easy and low-cost fashion through having a spreadsheet, using a Google Sheet to start categorizing who you're contacting, when you're contacting, when their children's birthdays are, something of that nature, so that you are developing your staying in touch skills. And then finally, the last two kind of go together. Can we be honest? We're trying to predict the future, as we've talked about through this session. We're also trying to use that to anticipate changes rather than react to changes. So we all knew that there was going to be situations in the future where we were going to be stuck at home, that we were going to have to use Amazon and webinars and other things. We've seen telecommuting in place for a couple decades now. We've seen video conferencing in place for a couple decades now. We knew that there were going to be times, whether it was a local, a regional, a national, or an international incident or something that was going to require us to hang out at our house for a period of time. Maybe it's a tornado, maybe it's a flood, maybe it's a hurricane, maybe it's whatever. We knew something was going to happen. How can we prepare our businesses to start using what we know is going to happen and sometimes can be predicted in the data, or where we've seen what happens when those situations happen, to anticipate that and be the first to market with solutions that deliver value to our customers. All right, so just in review, again, read continuously, at least your 5 hours a week. Be looking for advantages, be looking for opportunities to do what you do very well, your strengths, in situations where other people, competitors, are not. Remember that not planning is planning to fail, and you need to start analytics as soon as possible. Small is still fine. It's better than nothing. And it's better than waiting until you get to that point where you think you're big enough that you can really truly invest in it. No, start today, and then as you get to that'll help you to grow and develop, and then you can invest more later. And when it comes to recovery, it's not necessarily just the fact that you are recovering, but just recovering faster than competitors. I'll leave you with a real quick, short, funny story. You guys probably heard this story before, old story, short story. Two people are hiking in the woods, both wearing hiking boots. They see a mother bear with their cubs, and she's close enough that she's kind of grumpy and angry about the fact that they're around, and she gets ready to charge them. One of the hikers pulls out his tennis shoes and starts putting on his tennis shoes. The other hiker looks at him questioningly and say, "You know that a horse can run faster, a bear can run faster than a horse, excuse me, over short distances. There's no way you're going to be able to outrun the bear." The other hiker that's putting on tennis shoes says, "I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you," right? So I'll turn it over to Jody. You tell me what questions you have. Thank you very, very much for your time and attendance. I appreciate it. I hope we got some value out of this. And, what do you have for me?
Oh, we've got a slew of questions.
Good,
okay.
Good.
So the first question is, what are your top reading recommendations, books, newsletters, and regular trend things to look forward to in regards to trend analysis?
Excellent. So one of the easiest things to do is to go to industry associations, not just PPAI for your industry, but for your customers. So if you sell a lot of promotional products in the manufacturing industry, there's a website, I think it's called IEM, which is a media organization that produces this wonderful email newsletter around manufacturing, industrial engineering, production. And then what they do is they send out some of the trends, some of the data, some of the articles that you may not pick up in a big publication like the Wall Street Journal or Business Week or the New York Times business section. So the specific industry sites are great, and those typically have a sustainable revenue stream. In other words, they're paid for by members that also want information about the industry, and so they have conferences, they have blogs, they have a newsletter, stuff like that. So you can get this great information that's paid for by the members of this other industry. So that's a great way to do it. And then, as I mentioned, business publications. Business publications are great. Some of them are on lockdown. For example, they're under paid firewalls, for example, the New York Times, but there's a lot of other data and information that you can get from smaller organizations. And also, don't forget libraries and universities. If you go to a library, you can get access to things like the New York Times through their databases. If you go to a university, oftentimes they have ways in which the public can come in and get access to publications they're behind paywalls, such as Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And you could do that, say, on a weekly, monthly basis and get a lot of reading material very quickly.
Another industry resource are some of our newsletters and magazines and things like that. So we have the Promotional Consultant Today, which comes out daily. We have Newslink that comes out twice a week. And then we have PBB, which is a magazine, and that comes out monthly in both a digital and hard copy format. So if you have not signed up for that, any of those, I highly suggest it. I absolutely love my PCT every day because it provides subject matter experts, content, research, trend analysis in a one-page, short and sweet, get to the content type of format that I really enjoy. And it makes it so that it's really easy to stay up to date with a whole variety of content. So just one thing to look forward to there on a daily basis. And then Newslink, of course, on a bi-weekly, and PPB on a monthly basis. Okay, our next question is, how do you organize data when it feels like you have too much already and you feel the data overload, but with no current analysis? How do you get past that?
Yeah, so in general, there's a couple of algorithms or rules of thumb that you can use. So the first one is more recent data is probably better than old data. So if you're talking about data from 10 years ago versus data from last year, use the data from last year and put more weight on that. Also, when it comes to data that is more quantitative and or verified. In other words, it's empirical data that it's not a guess, it's actual empirical data. I would weight that higher as well. The other thing is, if you're getting data from sources, not internal, but external, the more valid a provider, probably the better the data. So something from the Wall Street Journal, I would trust more than somebody's blog site where they wear a tinfoil hat and they tend to have conspiracy theories. I might go, I don't know, maybe they're right, but the Wall Street Journal, I suspect they have a reputation to uphold. So I know that they've gone through an editorial process to verify that. So the first is try to narrow it down to things that are newer, things that are verified, quantitative, that you have, you believe it's truth, and then things from good sources. From there, then what I would do is an easy one. You ready for this? From a small business standpoint, small, medium-sized business, where does the majority of your revenue come from? If the majority of your revenue is around certain types of promotional products, then I might tend to be more interested in data that affects or predicts what's going to happen in that area. So focus on the 80% rather than the 20%, if that makes sense.
To build off of that, with what you had just said in regards to looking at your current sales volume in which categories and things like that, would you recommend going to those outside industry for some of the trends potentially in the retail world when it comes to apparel, for instance, and just
Yes.
to see what their trend looks like so that you could gauge it ahead of time?
Yeah, it's one of those consulting phrases that I really like, future forward. The idea is go to places where there's very good intellectual discussion around things that are going on in an industry. So again, if I'm there's a variety of industry trade association groups within a variety of industries, and if you tend to compete with or work with a lot of retailers, say in a specific industry, let's use apparel, you're going to find that there's some wonderful sites and wonderful information that's being put out by people that have a good reputation in the industry for being correct, or at least staying up to date in that industry. Find those people, find those websites, and then, by the way, your browser, as most of you know, is kind of annoying sometimes, but when you go to a certain website now, oftentimes you can stay in contact with that website by getting updates from that website, or they want you to sign up for a newsletter. Once you find a good site, sign up for that newsletter, and then you can sit back and wait for it to come to you, maybe while you're sitting at home in your underwear in front of the computer during the shelter in place, but you'll be able to sit back and have it come to you. The idea of agents or newsletters, having things pushed to you rather than you having to go out and do the research. That's the best way to do it.
Excellent. Okay. So would you recommend using my CRM system information with past purchases, communication dates, and what platform, communication medium they're using, weather data, industry publications, trend articles, economic reports? What else should we add into this as far as areas to keep in mind for our spreadsheet?
Wow, it sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Yeah, this is one of the things my students, particularly my MBA students, are always going, like, when I tell them, oh, you have to know all this, and they're like, I have to know all this? And yeah, welcome to business. So you don't get to be complacent. You don't just get to sit back and business will run as normal. It's not the way of things anymore. Things move so quickly. New competitors come into your market so quickly. If you show weakness, people can take market share from you so quickly anymore. It's so easy. Even the large companies are afraid of what competition is doing to them. You ever thought about this fact? Most people say Google, oh, they're undefeatable. They'll be around for hundreds of years. Do you think the majority of people use Google to find restaurants? No, it turns out people use Yelp. How about, do people use Google to find somebody to date? Now they use places like Tinder. Do you think people use Google for things like real estate? No, they tend to use Zillow or Redfin. If you start going through the things that people use to get access to things like information, Google's afraid, trust me. Do you think that they're going like, well, YouTube will be around forever? Well, I don't know, there's TikTok. Twitter has video on it. Facebook has video on it. There's a variety of places you can get access to video plus streaming media. None of these organizations, even large organizations, are comfortable. So, sorry, getting back to the question, what other sources of information? Social media. Social media is a fabulous way of getting access to information very quickly, particularly if you have a company site, because then you can access from your company page a variety of analytics, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. All of those have some fabulous, amazing analytical data about engagement with your post or your site. You can download that, put that onto an Excel spreadsheet. Ooh, it's wonderful. Great stuff, because you're getting directly to customers or their downstream customers with that.
What would you recommend as far as trying to go through in the first stage of analyzing? So we don't have a data analytic person quite yet that's full time. We're just starting this out. Would you recommend we go through it once a week, once a month, once a quarter, once a year? What's your frequency for getting started with?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, guys, you're gonna hate me a little bit for this. I had a mentor that was a management professor, a strategy professor at the University of Rice, and he had started a consulting firm. I got involved with him later in his life when his consulting firm was fairly successful, and done some work with him for some amazing customers. We got to do work for NASA and places like MD Anderson and ExxonMobil and others. He had an idea, and he had produced a book at the time. His name was Dr. Holland Davis, and he produced a book, Dutch Holland, sorry, Dutch Holland, forgetting his name now. Dutch is an odd name. Dr. Dutch Holland, he produced a book that was the consulting firm was Holland Davis, was called Run the Business, Change the Business. And his suggestion, which is very true right now, is that as a manager, particularly as a leader, you have no choice but to continue to run the business on a daily basis to keep the money coming in so you can keep the lights on, but you also have to change the business. And he gave the example, I always thought this was a really great one. If you're familiar with Broadway plays, think about how Broadway plays have to continue to develop the play, continue to make sure that the people are going to be there, and they have to be ready for the next play that's going to happen in small community theater, for the next play that's going to happen next week. So they have people in the background that are working on the sets for the next show. They have actors that are in the current show that are getting ready for their roles in the next show. They have to do both those things at the same time. So you have to run the business, you have to show up every day, and you have to put on theater, but then in the background, you also have to be working on what's the next show. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. Hope that answers the question, but my answer is you got to do both. I'm sorry.
I totally get it, and it makes sense. I think just maybe putting it onto your calendar on a daily basis to make sure that you have time reserved. I think that's the suggestion I would make, so that you make sure that you can do it. Obviously, you've got to keep the lights on and make sales calls and get everything done for your staff and make sure everything's good to go, but also staying ahead of the curve is on a regular basis. So for me, I live by my schedule, as you guys can imagine. So just blocking off that time to read those articles, to analyze the data, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, Covey actually covered that, not completely in those words, but the idea was that you would always schedule out your reading, your growth and development. So can we be honest, this is growth and development for your business, probably should be in your schedule. So I apologize, I don't know if I had to say if it should be daily or weekly, but let's say that the 5 hours a week that you're reading, you're planning for the development of your business, probably something similar for your planning the business in the future.
Excellent. Okay, the next one is in regards to the changing sales environment. So do you think, you spoke to it a little bit, but I wanted you to kind of add in a little bit more in regards to breaking through the clutter that will come after this pandemic. So there's going to be clients that are bombarded with sales calls and everything going on as life gets back to the new normal. What do you recommend for the new sales environment to make sure that you're staying in touch and not insensitive, and yet still able to get through to the clients that you need to?
A fabulous question. Great question. So I just read, so my students do a variety of projects for clients. And so we have customers that are small businesses, multi-million-dollar businesses, billion-dollar businesses, and nonprofits that go through our capstone. We do client experiential consulting. We ended up having a client that was software sales business very recently. And so it was really fascinating. As my students and I were doing through the research on it, we found out that the best model, the model had the most efficacy in terms of getting sales and software sales was the demo model. And the demo model they were finding was most effective in terms of setting up a time to get on somebody's schedule, to give them a peek of the software and potentially let them play around in a software. In other words, they had to do the demo to get access to the sandbox, meaning the example of the software. And so what they found was, rather than doing these expensive sales calls where you're sending people out on site to knock on doors and take them out to lunch and woo them that way, they found out that people were really curious and interested about things that could help their business. And the best way was to have almost a call center environment. We had people that literally just followed up on scheduling demos, and then based on the scheduling of demos, that they would try to intrigue them with the technical nature of the software and what it could do, allow them to have a 30-day access to be able to play around with the software, and then follow up with them. And then at that point, then if you need to do some heavy sales work, then you could talk about in-person consults and bringing in your technical experts or bringing in other people, to closers. So my belief is that software sales is probably a little bit cutting edge when it comes to the sales in general, particularly when it comes to business sales. That's probably going to be the way to go. Think about the Costco demos. Who doesn't love Costco and Sam's and those demos? That's the way I get hooked into all these new foods that I wouldn't have tried before. I see something out there. One place, I think it was Sam's, had like some buffalo fish, and I was like, what the heck is buffalo fish? I tried it. It was decadent. It was a demo. I bought a big box for, I don't know how many ever dollars I spent, and I didn't care. It was so good. But those demos are a great way to get in the heart and mind of your customers. So I would follow that software sales model. By the way, there was a good ROI associated with that demo from home approach.
So in regards to the promotional products industry, would I be able to assume that you're talking more in alignment with self-promotion? So you send a sample that's a version that you would be proposing, and then you follow that up with the next phone calls and you're next in the process. And just make sure that that self-promotion is part of that.
Yeah, so your job is to schedule them online, to get them online, maybe on a Zoom call like this or something like that, and then share your screen and show some pictures and talk about some of the technical specifications. And the person goes, wow, I wonder what that would look like if, because I see it on your screen, I'm intrigued. And then, so they have told you, it's basically crowdsourcing, getting your customer to tell you what to send to them so that you can nail them. So then you send them something through UPS or through FedEx or through the post office. They get it in a couple of days. They're looking at it. You schedule that follow up again. Say, hey, what'd you think? Did you like that? Did you like the one in yellow, or did you like the one in red? And then they give you some feedback on that. And suddenly you've developed that rapport with them. And next meeting is in the office or going out to lunch.
Our next question is, when it comes to social media data, where do you pull that? Should you add Google Analytics to certain pages, or on each of the different social media pages, do you pull the analytics off of that? Are you using any particular keys to be able to pull the data into a certain platform, or do you just take the analytic reports that each of the different social media platforms have and then combine it into your Excel spreadsheet and kind of go from there?
Well, interesting. So just to let you guys know, Jody and I were talking about this. It actually it takes a little bit of time to go into all of it, but I will give you some quick and easy ways in which to do it. First of all, for most of the social media, not all, but most of the social media sites, let's talk about Facebook. Largest number of people involved. Not always businesses, but businesses are the tech businesses you work with. Some of those are going to be interacting with Facebook sites. So for example, on Facebook, on social media, if you're promoting yourself to other businesses on Facebook, there is an ability, if you have a business page, not your own personal page, but a business page, what you can do is there's a link to go to your analytics. And that's where you look at, for example, your engagement rates, you look at your click-through rates and other things. You can then take that that and download that into Excel. Almost all those social media sites have a little button that says download the data, and you can download it and then get it into a spreadsheet. You can combine that with other social media information. There's also some software packages out there. Most of these are freemium models where you can get some access to the Hootsuite, for example, is one that comes to mind real quickly. Don't let that be necessarily just a commercial. There's dozens of them out there, but you can get access to all your social media, and it provides a way where you can get all of that combined and do it through a software package. But again, the more things you want to do with it, the more you're going to have to pay to get access to that. So again, there are some basic ways to do it, but you typically have to have a business site set up on your site. And then from there, you can take your contact list, you can take your engagement, you can take your who responded to your post, and you can pull that down, put it into a spreadsheet, and then you can start doing some analyzing of it off of the social media site.
Excellent. It looks like that is all the questions that we've had so far.
Good. Oh, one thing, I'm sorry, social media, it just occurred to me, one other thing. Almost all the major social media sites have a business or small business section to them. As I recall, just off the top of my head, I may be wrong, but it's like business.fb for facebook.com. There's almost all of them. You just look in there and say, and they'll have a site where they walk you through how to do some of the analytics for the different social media programs so that you can use them more effectively. But again, once you set up a business site, almost all of those resources, basic resources from the social media company, are available to you.
Excellent. Thank you, David. I know we've run over a little bit, but this has been absolutely informative and amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate, Jody, I appreciate the people at PPAI. Appreciate you for showing up for my webinar. Anything that I can do, you see my contact information up there, please reach out to me. And I look forward to joining you again in the future for another webinar or anything else I can do to help you guys.
Excellent. And thank you everybody for joining us. Today's live session, at the end of today's live session, you'll see the pop-up for the survey. Please make sure that you complete that. That way the credit is added to your transcript. For those on our on-demand session, please go back to your session launch page to open that online education survey for credit. Once you've completed it, it will add the credit to your transcript. Also, all of the links that we mentioned are added back into the handouts tab on the session launch page, including the link to the Get in Touch and PPAI industry research, in addition to the strategic foresight playbook, in addition to the handout and PowerPoint slides from today's session. All rights are reserved by Promotional Products Association International, and please make sure that you join us in the future. We've got weekly webinars, and we want to make sure that you're staying up to date with all the latest and greatest. We've got over 400 sessions on our platform, so check them out, and we look forward to seeing you someday in the future. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jody.